May 16, 1944, 11:47 p.m., somewhere between Lyon and Dijon, occupied France. The locomotive screams through the darkness, its wheels hammering against steel rails in a rhythm that sounds like war itself. Inside the engine cabin, two Wehrmacht soldiers lean against the vibration, their faces lit by the orange glow of the firebox. Behind them, stretching into the night, 23 freight cars groan under their cargo, 240 tons of artillery shells, small arms ammunition, panzerfaust rockets, and high-explosive ordnance destined for German positions in Normandy. The driver checks his watch. They're making good time. Another hour, and they'll reach the distribution depot at Dijon. Another hour, and this payload will be feeding German guns on the Atlantic Wall. The fortified coastline Hitler believes will throw any Allied invasion back into the sea. But 3 kilometers ahead, something waits in the darkness. A woman crouches beside the tracks, her hands working quickly in the moonlight. She's dressed like a farmer's wife. Rough cotton dress, worn boots, a scarf tied around her hair. Nothing about her appearance suggests what she really is. A British Special Operations executive agent, trained in sabotage, assassination, and the kind of psychological warfare that doesn't appear in any military manual. Her code name is Paulette, though that's not her real name either. Very little about her life for the past 2 years has been real. In her hands, she holds something that looks almost innocent, a small package wrapped in wax paper, roughly the size of a cigarette pack. Inside, plastic explosive, a pencil detonator, and a triggering mechanism. She modified herself using parts from a broken clock and a mousetrap. Standard SOE sabotage equipment, except for one addition, something she picked up in a village market 3 days ago. Something so simple and domestic that it never appeared in any training manual at the SOE's secret facilities in Scotland. A piece of jewellery. She secures the package to the underside of the rail, camouflaging it with dirt and gravel. The train's headlight is visible now, a single eye piercing the darkness. She has maybe 90 seconds. Her hands don't shake. They haven't shaken in months, not since she watched the Gestapo execute her radio operator in a village square, not since she realized that fear is just another tool, useful when you need adrenaline, irrelevant when you need precision. She makes one final adjustment, then slips into the tree line. The locomotive passes over the device at 11:49 p.m. Nothing happens. 1 car, 2 cars, 3 cars. The freight wagons roll over the hidden package, each one heavy enough to trigger a standard pressure plate, but none of them activate what she's planted. Because what she's planted isn't designed to explode on contact. It's designed to explode later, much later, when the train is exactly where she needs it to be. Car 23 passes. The train's red tail light disappears around a curve. Paulette remains motionless in the shadows, counting in her head. Not counting seconds, counting heartbeats. Her own heartbeat, steady and controlled, because what she's about to do isn't just sabotage. It's psychological warfare of the most intimate kind. A trick so charming, so audacious in its simplicity, that when German intelligence finally pieces together what happened, they'll change their entire counter-sabotage doctrine. And they'll spend the rest of the war looking for a weapon that doesn't exist. If you believe in forgotten heroes, the ones who won battles without firing a shot, stay tuned. Because what happens in the next hour will prove that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't a bomb, it's an idea. By the spring of 1944, the French resistance and Britain's Special Operations Executive face a problem that's costing them the war in the shadows. The problem isn't courage. Resistance fighters across France have demonstrated extraordinary bravery, conducting thousands of sabotage operations against German supply lines, communications infrastructure, and transportation networks. The problem isn't even equipment, though SOE agents constantly request more explosives, more weapons, more radio sets dropped by parachute in the dead of night. The problem is predictability. By 1944, German counterintelligence has been fighting the resistance for 4 years. They've studied the patterns. They've catalogued the methods. They know how SOE agents operate because many of those agents have been captured, interrogated, and broken. The Gestapo and the Abwehr, German military intelligence, maintain detailed files on sabotage techniques taught at SOE training schools. They know about plastic explosives shaped like coal lumps, designed to be tossed into locomotive tenders. They know about time pencil detonators, about magnetic limpet mines, about all the standard tricks. Most critically, they know about track sabotage. Rail lines are the arteries of the German war machine in occupied France. Every day, hundreds of trains move troops, ammunition, fuel, and equipment from German factories to French coastal defences. The Allies know that when D-Day comes, and everyone knows it's coming, the German ability to rush reinforcements to the invasion beaches will depend entirely on rail transportation. French roads are inadequate for moving heavy armour and artillery. The channel is blocked by Allied naval superiority. Rail is everything, which means rail sabotage is everything. But German engineers have become very good at preventing it. Every major rail line in occupied France operates under strict security protocols. Trains carrying military cargo travel with armed guards. Track inspection crews walk every kilometre of line before each military train passes, looking for signs of tampering, disturbed ballast, displaced rails, suspicious objects. In high-threat areas, the Germans install tripwires that trigger flares if someone approaches the tracks at night. They employ collaborators from the local population to report unusual activity. They execute saboteurs publicly and viciously, sometimes along with their families, to discourage others. And they've developed rapid response repair procedures. When a standard track charge detonates, blowing a section of rail apart, German engineering battalions can have replacement rails laid and traffic moving again within 6 to 8 hours. The disruption is temporary, painful, but temporary. SOE planners in London study the numbers with increasing frustration. In the first quarter of 1944 alone, French resistance networks and SOE circuits conduct over 3,000 documented sabotage operations against German railways. The result? A temporary reduction in German transport capacity of approximately 15%. Within weeks, German countermeasures restore that capacity. The saboteurs take casualties. Over 200 agents and resistance fighters killed or captured in railway operations during the same 3-month period. A grim exchange rate. Multiple lives for a few hours of disruption. At SOE headquarters in Baker Street, London, senior planners debate the problem. Brigadier Colin Gubbins, the Director of Operations and Training, reviews the reports with his staff. The consensus is troubling. Traditional railway sabotage isn't working well enough. It's not creating the sustained disruption the invasion will need. We need something they can't predict, Gubbins tells his team during one meeting in March 1944. Something that doesn't follow the pattern. But what? Sabotage techniques exist within certain physical constraints. You need explosive force to destroy rail infrastructure. You need triggering mechanisms to detonate that explosive at the right moment. You need agents capable of placing the devices and escaping before German patrols arrive. These fundamentals haven't changed since railways were invented. Or have they? The answer is already in France, already working, already developing in the mind of an agent whose name most history books won't remember. Her real name is Odette Weiland, though she's used at least 6 aliases since 1942. Her SOE personnel file, classified until 2003, describes her as unpredictable, occasionally insubordinate, but remarkably effective. She's 28 years old when she parachutes into France in October 1943. Before the war, she worked as a translator in Paris, fluent in English, French, and German. Not a soldier, not a career intelligence officer, just a woman who happened to speak the right languages at the right time, and who answered an advertisement in a British newspaper asking for French speakers willing to serve in special duties. SOE training reports from her time at the special training schools in Scotland are mixed. Her weapons proficiency is rated adequate but not exceptional. Her physical fitness scores are average. Her radio operation skills, critical for an agent working behind enemy lines, are described as functional but slow. But buried in the middle of one instructor's evaluation is a note that will prove prophetic. Trainee demonstrates unusual aptitude for psychological assessment. She has an instinct for identifying what motivates people, both what they want and what they fear. Could be valuable in recruitment and deception operations. That instinct is about to change the game. When Odette arrives in France, she's assigned to a network operating in the Burgundy region, the strategic corridor between Paris and Lyon. Her primary mission is courier work, carrying messages, coordinating supply drops, connecting isolated resistance cells. It's important work, but not particularly glamorous. She's not leading commando raids or assassinating German officers. She's doing the inglorious, grinding labor that keeps resistance networks functioning, forging identity papers, bribing corrupt officials, memorizing train schedules, identifying collaborators, and watching, always watching. She watches how German soldiers behave at checkpoints. She watches how Wehrmacht officers treat French civilians. She watches how Gestapo agents interrogate suspects. She watches the psychological texture of the occupation, not the military hardware, but the human software running it. And she notices something interesting. German soldiers, especially the younger ones, are lonely, desperately lonely. They're occupying a hostile country where almost everyone hates them, where they can't trust the locals, where every woman might be a resistance courier and every smile might be a prelude to assassination. They're far from home, homesick, scared beneath their arrogance, and they're hungry for human connection, for kindness, for flirtation, for anything that makes them feel like men instead of invaders. Odette begins using this, not in the crude way you might expect, not seduction exactly, something subtler. She begins studying the psychology of small kindnesses, the way a smile or a sympathetic word can create obligations in the target's mind, can make them want to help you, to prove they're not like the other Germans, to demonstrate that they're decent men caught in an indecent situation. At checkpoints, she makes brief eye contact with guards, not flirtatious, just human. She asks about their families in carefully accented German. She expresses sympathy for their difficult duty. Sometimes she carries small gifts, nothing suspicious, just a bottle of wine or a few apples, and offers them to soldiers with a warmth that stands in stark contrast to the sullen hostility most French civilians display. And the soldiers respond. They become less vigilant around her. They warn her when Gestapo patrols are coming. They ask her advice about French customs. They show her photographs of their girlfriends back in Germany and ask if she thinks their relationships will survive the war. She's building a network of unwitting assets, Germans who trust her. Germans who would never suspect her of being anything other than what she appears, a French civilian trying to survive the occupation with as little trouble as possible. In January 1944, her network leader is arrested. The Gestapo raids a safe house and captures most of the cell's leadership. Odette survives because she's not at the meeting. She's at a cafe, charming information out of a Wehrmacht supply sergeant about train schedules. When she learns what happened, she goes dark, operating independently, waiting for London to re-establish contact and send new orders. But she doesn't wait passively. She keeps working. And she starts noticing patterns in the German rail security procedures. The Germans, she realizes, are fighting the last war. They're defending against the sabotage techniques that worked in 1940, 1941, 1942. They're scanning for track charges placed at obvious choke points. They're looking for immediate detonation devices that explode when the train passes over them. They're expecting resistance fighters to hit the trains in remote areas where escape is easier. But what if you didn't do any of that? What if you put the bomb somewhere the Germans would never think to look? What if you made the bomb invisible, not by hiding it in the physical sense, but by hiding it in the conceptual sense, by placing it in a context so mundane, so innocent, that German security wouldn't recognize it as a threat? The idea begins to form. Not a complete plan yet, just a question. What if the bomb traveled with the train? April 1944. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. Allied intelligence confirms what everyone already knows. D-Day is approaching. The invasion of France will happen sometime in the next 2 months, probably along the Normandy coast. When it happens, The German ability to move armoured divisions to the landing beaches will determine whether the invasion succeeds or fails. In France, the resistance intensifies operations. Attacks on rail infrastructure increase. The Germans respond with brutal countermeasures. Public executions become common. Entire villages are massacred for suspected collaboration with the resistance. The Gestapo arrests over 200 suspected resistance members in April alone. And still, the trains keep running. German transport officers implement new security protocols. Every military train now carries a minimum of 20 armed guards. Track inspection frequency doubles. The Germans start executing not just saboteurs, but the families of saboteurs. Anyone who lives near sites of sabotage. Anyone suspected of failing to report suspicious activity. The cost of resistance is becoming almost unbearable, and the impact, the actual disruption to German rail capacity, remains frustratingly limited. In Lyon, a resistance cell attempts to derail a German ammunition train using a classic track charge. The device explodes perfectly, destroying 30 meters of rail. Within 4 hours, German engineers have temporary tracks laid. Within 8 hours, trains are moving again. The cost: 5 resistance fighters killed in the attack, 11 civilians executed in retaliation, 1 entire village placed under martial law. Another cell tries a different approach: a time-delayed charge hidden in a locomotive coal tender. The device is discovered during a routine inspection. The entire crew of the resistance safehouse, where the device was assembled, is arrested and executed. The Germans are winning the sabotage war through attrition, through security procedures, and through sheer brutal determination to keep their logistics functioning. SOE circuits across France report the same frustration. Traditional methods, increasingly ineffective, need new approach. Odette reads these reports, transmitted in coded radio messages she picks up from a resistance operator in Chalon-sur-Saône, and knows the answer isn't more explosives or better timing. The answer is psychology. The answer is doing something so unexpected, so outside the German security paradigm that they won't see it coming. But what? The breakthrough comes in late April, in the most mundane possible setting, a village market. She's buying vegetables in a small town 20 kilometers south of Dijon. It's market day, and despite the occupation, despite the war, despite everything, French civilians still gather to buy food, to gossip, to maintain some semblance of normal life. Odette moves through the crowd with practiced ease, her forged identity papers identifying her as the widow of a railway worker killed in an Allied bombing raid. A cover story that's both plausible and designed to evoke sympathy from German authorities if they check. At one stall, an elderly woman sells costume jewellery, cheap brooches, necklaces made of coloured glass, paste gems that imitate diamonds and rubies. Tourist trinkets, essentially. Worthless. Odette stops, not because she wants jewellery, but because she notices something. A German officer, a major in the transportation corps, based on his insignia, is haggling with the vendor over a bracelet. He's clearly buying it as a gift, probably for a girlfriend back in Germany. The old woman is charging him an exorbitant price, and he's paying it without much argument, despite his obvious knowledge that he's being overcharged. Why? Odette watches the transaction carefully. The officer is lonely. He's homesick. He wants something personal to send home, something that says, "I'm thinking of you." The bracelet is worthless objectively, but subjectively, emotionally, it has enormous value. It's a token, a symbol, a small physical object that carries meaning far beyond its material composition. And that's when it hits her. Trains carry cargo. That cargo is inspected. But what about the personal belongings of the soldiers guarding the cargo? What about the small items they carry with them? The photographs, the letters, the good luck charms, the gifts they've purchased to send home. Nobody searches those. Nobody suspects those. Because they're personal. They're innocent. They're just things. What if you could weaponize innocence? She buys 3 items from the vendor: a brooch, a compact mirror, and a small jewelry box. Total cost, 60 francs. In her mind, she's already calculating. The brooch is metal and glass. sturdy enough to hold a small amount of explosive. The compact mirror could conceal a thin detonator. The jewelry box could be modified to hold a triggering mechanism. But the real insight isn't the objects themselves. The real insight is the delivery method. You don't plant the bomb on the train. You give it to someone who plants it for you, someone who has no idea they're carrying a weapon. The plan takes shape over the next 2 weeks. First, Odette identifies her target, a Wehrmacht sergeant named Klaus Becker, assigned to guard duty on military supply trains running from Lyon to Dijon. She's seen him before at checkpoints, noticed him during her surveillance of German rail security procedures. He's young, maybe 22, blonde, earnest, exactly the kind of soldier who responds to kindness. Not an ideological Nazi, just a conscript doing his duty, counting the days until he can go home. Perfect. She accidentally encounters him at a cafe in Lyon. She's dressed carefully, not provocatively, but nicely. Clean dress, neat hair, a touch of makeup. She looks like a respectable French woman, maybe a shop clerk or a teacher. Definitely not a spy. She drops her shopping bag near his table. Apples roll across the floor. He helps her pick them up. She thanks him in German, deliberately grammatically imperfect German, with a French accent, but good enough to communicate. They talk. Just small talk. She asks where he's from. Bavaria, he tells her. She knows Bavaria. She's lying, but she knows enough to fake it. She talks about Munich, about the mountains, about how beautiful Germany must be. He relaxes. He's been waiting for someone to treat him like a human being instead of an occupier. Over the next week, she encounters him 3 more times. Never suspiciously often. Just casual meetings that seem coincidental. A cafe, a bakery, a park bench. Each time, they talk a little longer. She learns about his family. His mother runs a bakery in a village outside Munich. His father was killed in Russia. He has a younger sister named Greta who's about to graduate from school. He misses home terribly. He hates France, not because of the French, but because he wants to be anywhere else. And she learns something crucial. In 6 days, he's scheduled for guard duty on a major ammunition train travelling from Lyon to Dijon, a train carrying ordnance destined for German positions in Normandy. On their 4th meeting, she gives him a gift. "For your sister," she says, handing him a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, a brooch. Simple, pretty, the kind of thing a teenage girl might like. I saw it and thought, well, you talk about her so much. She must be very special to you. He's touched, genuinely touched. His eyes get a little wet. You didn't have to. It's nothing, she says. A small thing, for kindness. She smiles. You've been kind to me. Most soldiers aren't. He accepts the gift. He promises to send it to his sister. He tells Odette she's different from other French women. She doesn't hate him. She understands that he's just trying to survive, just like everyone else. She agrees. She understands perfectly. What Klaus Becker doesn't know, what he can't know, is that the brooch is hollow. Inside the decorative metal backing, sealed beneath a thin layer of wax that perfectly mimics the original surface, sits 40 grams of plastic explosive connected to a modified pencil timer. The timer is set for 72 hours, long enough for him to carry the brooch onto the ammunition train, long enough for him to relax and forget about it, stored in his rucksack with his other personal belongings. But the real genius of the design isn't the explosive. It's what's attached to the triggering mechanism. A small magnet, scavenged from a broken radio and carefully calibrated to respond to a specific magnetic signature. The signature of steel rails passing at high speed beneath a moving train. May 16th, 1944. 10:30 p.m. Klaus Becker boards the ammunition train at Lyon's freight depot. He's tired. He's been on duty for 16 hours already, and this is supposed to be his last assignment before 3 days of leave. He's looking forward to sleep, to letters from home, to forgetting, for a brief moment, that he's part of an army losing a war. His rucksack sits on the floor of the guard car. Uniform, rations, cigarettes, personal correspondence. and a small package containing a brooch intended for his sister. The train departs at 10:47 p.m. 23 freight cars loaded with ammunition and high explosives. It's not the largest munitions shipment of the week, but it's significant, enough ordnance to supply an artillery battalion for a week of sustained combat. At 11:47 p.m., the train passes over a section of track 3 kilometers south of Dijon. Odette isn't there. She's 20 kilometers away, in a safe house, listening to a radio transmission from a resistance spotter positioned near the tracks. The spotter has night vision binoculars, a rare piece of equipment, British-made, dropped by parachute 2 months ago. The train passes. Nothing happens, exactly as planned. The spotter radios. Target in motion. No anomalies. Odette waits. Not nervously, calmly, because either the device works or it doesn't. Either the magnetic trigger activated properly when the train passed over the specific section of track where she planted a shaped piece of magnetized steel beneath the rails, or it didn't. Either the pencil timer is functioning correctly or it's not. You can't control outcomes in war. You can only control preparation. At 11:52 p.m., the train enters the Dijon freight depot and begins to slow for its scheduled stop. Standard procedure. Guards will dismount. Engineering crews will inspect the locomotive. Cargo manifests will be checked against depot records. Then the train will be broken up. Individual cars shunted to different storage sidings based on cargo type and distribution priority. The train is moving at approximately 15 kilometers per hour when it happens. Car 17, a freight wagon loaded with 75mm artillery shells, erupts in a fireball that turns night into day. The initial explosion is relatively small, just 40 grams of plastic explosive, barely enough to damage the car's structural integrity under normal circumstances. But this isn't a normal circumstance. Car 17 is loaded with high explosives. The shaped charge, positioned perfectly by blind luck as Klaus Becker's rucksack slid across the guard car floor during the journey, coming to rest against the metal wall adjacent to the ammunition cargo, penetrates the wall and detonates 3 wooden crates of artillery shells. The secondary explosion is catastrophic. The fireball engulfs cars 16 through 19. Metal shrieks as wagon couplings fail under the sudden pressure wave. Ammunition detonates in a cascading chain reaction. Artillery shells, small arms rounds, panzerfaust rockets, everything cooking off simultaneously. The sound is apocalyptic. Not one explosion, but hundreds, thousands. A continuous roar that shatters windows 2 kilometers away. Klaus Becker dies instantly, vaporized before his nervous system can register pain. 37 other German soldiers die in the next 15 seconds. Another 62 are wounded, many catastrophically. But the casualties are almost incidental compared to the material loss. By 12:07 a.m., 15 minutes after the initial explosion, 17 of the 23 freight cars are destroyed or damaged beyond use. The Dijon freight depot's main switching yard is cratered and burning. Rail cars from other trains, parked on adjacent sidings, are damaged by shrapnel and secondary fires. The depot's water supply, critical for firefighting, is severed when a piece of flying metal punctures the main line. German firefighters and military personnel battle the blaze until dawn. They save perhaps 30% of the cargo. The rest burns or cooks off in continuous secondary explosions throughout the night. When the sun rises on May 17th, the Dijon freight depot looks like it's been hit by an air raid. Smoke rises from multiple burning cars. Crater marks pockmark the switching yard. Twisted metal lies everywhere. The main rail line through the depot is blocked by wreckage. German engineers estimate it will take a minimum of 5 days to clear the wreckage and restore rail traffic. Probably longer. Significantly longer. And the Germans have no idea what happened. The investigation begins immediately. German military police and Abwehr intelligence officers swarm the site. They're looking for evidence of sabotage, track charges, timing devices, signs of forced entry, anything that fits the profile of a resistance operation. They find nothing. No explosives planted on the tracks, no tampering with the rail cars before departure, no suspicious individuals reported near the depot. Security patrols recorded no anomalies. The guards performed their duties correctly. The track inspection crews found nothing wrong with the rails. It makes no sense. Ammunition trains don't simply explode spontaneously. Even under the best circumstances, even with every safety protocol followed perfectly, there's always something, some spark, some friction, some identifiable cause. But the fire has destroyed most of the evidence. The explosion's epicenter is impossible to determine with certainty because so much material is vaporized or scattered. Investigators can identify that car 17 was involved in the initial blast, but they can't determine what triggered it. The official report, filed on May 22nd, concludes, cause unknown, possibly accidental detonation due to mechanical friction or enemy action of uncertain nature. It's unsatisfying. It's vague. And it terrifies German logistics officers because if they can't identify the cause, they can't prevent it from happening again. In London, SOE headquarters receives a coded radio transmission from Odette on May 19th. The message is brief. Lyon-Dijon cargo train destroyed night of 16th. Method confirmed effective. Can replicate. Request supplies for additional operations. The message takes 24 hours to decode and authenticate. When it reaches Brigadier Gubbin's desk, he reads it 3 times, trying to understand what he's looking at. What method? He asks his staff. What the hell did she do? The answer arrives in a follow-up transmission 2 days later. Odette explains the technique. Psychological targeting of German personnel, weaponized gifting, magnetic trigger, time delay, placement inside secure perimeter via unwitting courier. Reading the report, Gubbins realizes he's looking at something unprecedented. Not just a successful sabotage operation, but an entirely new category of warfare. One that bypasses physical security through psychological manipulation. One that weaponizes trust and kindness. One that the Germans have no existing countermeasures against because it exploits human nature rather than technical vulnerabilities. How do you defend against this? One officer asks during the briefing. You can't, Gubbins says. Not without destroying morale completely. You'd have to ban soldiers from accepting any objects from civilians. You'd have to treat every personal possession as a potential weapon. You'd have to make your men so paranoid, so isolated, that they'd be useless. Which is exactly the point. Over the next 4 weeks, Odette conducts 5 more operations using variations of the technique. Operation 2 targets a fuel depot near Chalon-sur-Saône. She befriends a German supply clerk, gives him a cigarette case as a gift. The case contains a time-delayed incendiary device. The clerk carries it into the depot's administrative building and leaves it in his locker. The device detonates during a night shift change. The resulting fire spreads to nearby fuel storage tanks. Total loss: approximately 60,000 litres of gasoline and diesel. Operation 3 targets a communications hub. The gift is a decorative pen, given to a German signals officer. The pen contains a small thermite charge. The officer leaves it on his desk. The charge melts through the desk, through the floor, and into a cable junction box directly beneath the building. Communications are disrupted for 72 hours. Operation 4 fails. The German soldier she targets becomes suspicious, not of the gift specifically, but of her attention. He reports the contact to his superior. Odette escapes before the Gestapo can respond, but the circuit has to go dark for 2 weeks. Operation 5 succeeds spectacularly. Another ammunition train, this time near Auxerre. 30 German casualties. An estimated 180 tons of munitions destroyed. Rail traffic disrupted for 6 days. Operation 6 targets a Wehrmacht barracks. The gift is a music box. A soldier mentions his fiancée loves music, and Odette finds an antique music box at considerable expense. Inside the mechanism, plastic explosive and a mercury switch that arms after 12 hours of immobility and detonates on the next movement. The soldier places the music box in his footlocker in the barracks. 3 days later, he opens the locker to retrieve something. The resulting explosion kills 4 soldiers and wounds 17 more. By mid-June, when the Allies land in Normandy, German intelligence is in a state of near panic about what they're calling the gift weapon phenomenon. They issue bulletins to all German personnel in occupied territories. Do not accept personal items from French civilians. Do not accept gifts of any kind. Report any unsolicited contact with civilians who appear unusually friendly. But the directive is almost impossible to enforce. Soldiers are human beings. They're lonely. They're starving for human connection. And the Germans can't ban all contact with civilians without completely breaking down the occupation's basic functionality. They need French rail workers, French shopkeepers, French administrators to keep the infrastructure functioning. The psychological impact is devastating. German soldiers become paranoid. Every interaction with a French civilian becomes suspect. The trust that's necessary for basic social functioning evaporates. Morale plummets, and the resistance benefits enormously. German paranoia creates opportunities for real saboteurs, the ones using traditional methods, because German security forces are distracted, stretched thin, chasing shadows and investigating every instance of Franco-German social contact. Odette has created a force multiplier, not through her own operations, though those are effective, but through the psychological disruption those operations create. She's made the Germans afraid of their own shadow, suspicious of kindness, isolated in a hostile country. The ultimate asymmetric warfare, turning the enemy's humanity into a vulnerability. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces land in Normandy. The invasion, Operation Overlord, is the largest amphibious assault in history. 156,000 troops landing on 5 beaches along a 50-mile stretch of French coastline. The German response depends entirely on their ability to move reinforcements to the landing areas quickly. Panzer divisions stationed in interior France need to reach the beaches within 24 to 48 hours, or the Allies will establish an unbreakable lodgment. But the reinforcements don't arrive. Not on time. Not in strength. German panzer divisions attempting to move north encounter relentless delays. Rail transport is disrupted by ongoing sabotage operations, including multiple successful applications of Odette's gift weapon technique by other SOE agents who've been taught the method through coded radio transmissions. Roads are blocked by downed bridges, destroyed by Allied airstrikes. Communications are spotty because key hubs were sabotaged weeks earlier. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, stationed near Toulouse, requires 17 days to reach Normandy, a journey that should have taken 3 days. The division arrives depleted, exhausted, and too late to affect the battle's outcome. Similar delays plague other divisions. Military historians will later debate the exact impact of French resistance operations on the Normandy campaign's success. The numbers vary, but most estimates suggest that railway sabotage, including but not limited to Odette's operations, reduced German rail capacity in northern France by approximately 50% in the critical first 2 weeks after D-Day. 50%. The difference between German reinforcements arriving in time to contain the invasion and arriving too late to prevent the breakout. Eisenhower himself will later say that the French resistance was worth 15 divisions to the Allied cause. 15 divisions, perhaps 200,000 troops, that didn't need to be sent to France because the resistance was doing their job for them. And hidden in that figure, uncredited and unacknowledged, are Odette's contributions. The trains that never arrived. The ammunition that burned in depots instead of feeding German guns. The psychological disruption that made German soldiers doubt every interaction, every kindness, every moment of human connection. She didn't win the war. No single person does. But she changed its outcome in ways that rippled far beyond the immediate destruction her devices caused. July 1944. Odette is recalled to London. The extraction is difficult. The Gestapo has intensified operations in the Burgundy region, knowing that effective resistance networks are operating there. She moves between safe houses, always one step ahead of German police. On 2 occasions, she's nearly captured, once at a checkpoint, once during a raid on a residence where she'd stayed the previous night. But she makes it. A British Lysander aircraft picks her up from a moonlit field near Châteauroux on July 12th. 6 hours later, she's in London, being debriefed by SOE officers who look at her like she's some kind of magician. "How did you think of it?" one officer asks. "The gift method. Where did the idea come from?" She thinks about how to answer. How do you explain intuition? How do you describe the process of seeing human behavior as a system with exploitable vulnerabilities, the way an engineer sees a bridge's structural weaknesses? "They were lonely," she says finally. "I just used that." The officer nods, but she can see he doesn't really understand. Most people won't. Most people see warfare as a contest of physical force. More tanks, more planes, more bombs. They don't see the psychological dimension, the way beliefs and emotions can be weaponized, the way kindness can become lethal if deployed with surgical precision. She's offered a decoration. She declines. She's told she'll be sent to the Pacific Theater. SOE is expanding operations against Japanese forces in Southeast Asia, and her skills would be valuable there. She declines that too. "I'm done," she tells the SOE personnel officer. "I did what I was asked to do. Now I want to go home." "You don't have a home," the officer points out, not unkindly. "Your flat in Paris was destroyed in the bombing. Your previous life is gone. France will take years to recover." "Then I'll build a new one," she says. Somewhere quiet. The officer doesn't argue. He processes her discharge papers. By the end of July 1944, Odette Whelan is officially a civilian again. She receives a modest pension, a letter of commendation that will remain classified for 60 years, and a handshake from Brigadier Gubbins himself. "You did extraordinary work," he tells her, "the kind that saves thousands of lives by preventing battles rather than winning them. History won't remember your name, but we will." She nods. She doesn't need history to remember. She needs to forget. To forget the feeling of handing a gift to a young man and knowing it will kill him. To forget the weight of weaponized kindness. To forget the nights spent calculating detonation times and trigger mechanisms while maintaining the perfect mask of innocent friendship. She settles in a village in Cornwall, as far from France as she can manage while staying in Europe. She works in a bookshop. She learns to sail. She never marries. She never speaks about the war except in the most general terms. "I did courier work for the resistance, nothing glamorous." Her neighbours know her as a quiet woman who keeps to herself, who feeds stray cats, who reads voraciously in 3 languages. They have no idea that the elderly woman arranging books on shelves once turned the Wehrmacht's own humanity into a weapon, once made the German military afraid of accepting gifts from civilians, once triggered explosions that changed the course of history. She dies in 1998, at the age of 82. Her obituary in the local paper is 3 paragraphs long. Retired translator, served in France during the war. No surviving family. But the technique survives. After the war, intelligence agencies study Odette's operations with intense interest. The CIA, the KGB, MI6, Mossad, everyone wants to understand the psychological mechanisms she exploited. How do you weaponize trust? How do you turn gifts into bombs? How do you select targets who will unwittingly carry weapons into secure areas? The method appears in intelligence manuals, usually under euphemistic names: social engineering, trust exploitation, psychological insertion vectors. It's taught at intelligence training facilities. It's used occasionally in circumstances that remain classified. But it's never as effective as when Odette did it. Because Odette wasn't following a manual. She was operating on instinct, on an intuitive understanding of human psychology that can't be easily taught or replicated. She knew how to make people trust her not because she'd studied interrogation techniques, but because she genuinely understood loneliness, homesickness, the human need for connection. She knew how to be kind in a way that killed. German military records, declassified in the 1990s, reveal the full extent of the panic her operations caused. Internal Abwehr memos from June 1944 describe a systematic failure of security protocols and a psychological warfare campaign of unprecedented sophistication. One memo, dated June 18, 1944, states, The enemy has developed methods that bypass all physical security measures by exploiting the social and emotional vulnerabilities of our personnel. Traditional counter-sabotage procedures are ineffective. Recommend complete prohibition of civilian contact for all military personnel in occupied territories. But that recommendation was never implemented. The Wehrmacht knew it would be catastrophic for morale. You can't run an occupation when your soldiers are forbidden from talking to the occupied population. You can't maintain logistics when every interaction is treated as a potential threat. The psychological cost would destroy unit cohesion faster than any resistance operation, so the Germans lived with the threat. They issued warnings, tightened some procedures, executed suspects. But they couldn't solve the fundamental problem. Odette had found a vulnerability that couldn't be patched without breaking the system entirely. Today, military historians debate Odette's legacy. Some argue that her impact has been exaggerated, that her operations, while successful, were only a small part of the larger resistance effort. They point out that traditional sabotage operations destroyed more infrastructure, that commando raids killed more Germans, that signals intelligence provided more strategic value. They're probably right, in the narrowly quantifiable sense. If you count tons of explosives used or casualties inflicted, Odette's contribution looks modest. But they're missing the point. Odette's contribution wasn't primarily in the physical damage she caused. It was in the psychological disruption. It was in forcing the Germans to defend against an entire category of threat they hadn't anticipated. It was in creating paranoia that multiplied the effectiveness of every other resistance operation. It was in demonstrating that asymmetric warfare isn't just about being weaker and fighting smarter. It's about changing the nature of the fight itself, about introducing new rules that your enemy can't adapt to without destroying themselves. She proved that the most devastating weapon isn't always the one with the biggest explosion. Sometimes it's the one that makes your enemy doubt everything they think they know about security, trust, and human nature. In 2003, when SOE files from World War II were finally declassified, Odette's story emerged in fragments, partial reports, coded messages, third-hand accounts from surviving agents who'd heard rumors of the woman who weaponized gifts. The full details remained obscure. Many records were destroyed in the war or lost in the bureaucratic chaos of post-war reorganization. But enough survived to piece together the outline of what she accomplished. Enough survived to show that this woman, this translator who became a spy almost by accident, developed a technique so innovative, so psychologically sophisticated, that intelligence agencies are still studying it 80 years later. If this story matters to you, if you believe that the most important battles are often fought in shadows by people whose names never appear in history books, remember Odette Villain. Remember that courage comes in many forms, and the deadliest weapons aren't always the most obvious. On a warm spring morning in 1994, a group of French schoolchildren visits the Dijon Railway Museum. They're learning about the war, about the resistance, about the battles fought in their grandparents' time. Their teacher shows them photographs of destroyed trains, burned freight depots, twisted rails. The resistance fought to stop German supplies from reaching the front, the teacher explains. They used explosives to destroy trains and tracks. One child raises her hand. How did they get the explosives onto the trains? Weren't the Germans guarding them? The teacher pauses. It's a good question. They hid the explosives, she says. They were very clever about where they placed them. It's not wrong exactly, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is stranger, more psychologically complex, more disturbing in its implications than a children's history lesson can contain. The whole truth is that sometimes the Germans carried the explosives onto the trains themselves. Sometimes they guarded them carefully, protected them, kept them safe in their personal belongings. Sometimes they died, never knowing that the gift they received from a kind French woman, a cigarette case, a brooch, a music box, was the weapon that killed them. War, in the end, is about finding and exploiting vulnerabilities. Odette found one that no one else had thought to look for. She found it not in railway infrastructure or German military procedures, but in the human heart. In loneliness, in the need for kindness, in the desperate desire to be seen as a person rather than an occupier. And she exploited it with a ruthlessness that would have horrified the young men who trusted her, who thanked her for her gifts, who died never knowing they'd been weapons all along. The question that haunts everyone who studies Odette's story is this: how do you live with that? How do you smile at someone? Make them trust you, give them something with your own hands, knowing it will kill them. How do you weaponize kindness and remain human? How do you cross that line and come back? The answer, based on the few personal accounts that survived, is maybe you don't come back. Not completely. Maybe you become someone else, someone who understands that every human interaction is a potential battlefield, that trust is just another resource to be exploited, that kindness can be as lethal as a bullet if deployed correctly. Odette never gave interviews about her wartime service. She never wrote a memoir. She never sought recognition. But people who knew her in Cornwall describe a woman who was kind, genuinely kind, but in a careful, measured way. She helped her neighbours. She donated to charity. She was unfailingly polite. But she kept everyone at a distance. She never let anyone get truly close. One neighbour, interviewed in 2004, said, "She was lovely, but there was something held back. Like she'd decided she could be kind or she could be intimate, but not both. Like kindness was something she did rather than something she felt." Maybe that was the cost. Maybe that was what the war took from her. The ability to give without calculating, to connect without analysing, to trust without measuring risk. Or maybe, and this is the more disturbing possibility, maybe she was always like that. Maybe the ability to weaponize trust requires a certain psychological architecture, a way of seeing people not as fully human but as systems with inputs and outputs, as machines that respond predictably to the right stimuli. Maybe the woman who could hand a bomb to a lonely soldier and sleep soundly that night was never like the rest of us to begin with. We'll never know. She took the answer with her. What we do know is this. In May 1944, a train exploded. German logistics suffered a disruption that cascaded into larger disruptions. Allied forces landed in Normandy and survived the critical first days partly because German reinforcements arrived too late, moving through a transportation network degraded by countless acts of sabotage. And one of those acts, one of the most psychologically sophisticated, most personally brutal acts of sabotage in the entire war, was committed by a woman whose name appears in fewer than 20 official documents, whose face appears in no wartime photographs, whose story was classified for 60 years. Odette Wieland proved that you don't need to be strong to be deadly. You don't need authority or rank or official sanction. You just need to understand people, really understand them, in all their vulnerability and loneliness and desperate need for human connection. And you need to be willing to exploit that understanding without mercy. The Wehrmacht learned this lesson too late. By the time they realized what was happening, by the time they understood that gifts could be weapons and kindness could be lethal, the damage was done. Their soldiers were isolated, paranoid, unable to trust the very civilians they were supposed to be controlling. Their logistics network was compromised not just physically, but psychologically. Every interaction became a potential threat. Every moment of human connection, a possible vector for attack. You can't run an army like that. You can't occupy a country like that. You can't win a war like that. Odette understood this intuitively. She understood that in asymmetric warfare, you don't need to be stronger than your enemy. You just need to be more creative, more psychologically agile, more willing to use unconventional weapons. Even if that weapon is something as simple, as ordinary, as devastating as a gift given with a smile. Modern counter-terrorism training includes modules on gift-based threat vectors, the possibility that explosives might be delivered not by obvious enemies, but by seemingly friendly actors exploiting trust relationships. Airport security protocols specifically screen for modified personal items that could contain explosives. Military personnel deployed to hostile territories receive briefings on social engineering attacks and the importance of maintaining professional distance from local populations. All of this traces back, in part, to what Odette did in occupied France in 1944. She opened a door that can never be fully closed, the door to weaponized social interaction, to trust as vulnerability, to kindness as a vector for violence. It's uncomfortable to acknowledge. We want our heroes to be straightforward. Brave soldiers storming beaches, pilots shooting down enemy planes, commanders making brilliant tactical decisions. We don't want to think about the spy who killed through kindness, who exploited loneliness, who turned the most basic human need for connection into a weapon. But war isn't comfortable. War is about finding every possible advantage and exploiting it without hesitation. War is about doing things that would be unthinkable in peacetime and living with the consequences. Odette did what needed to be done. She saw a vulnerability no one else had identified. She developed a method to exploit it. She executed that method with precision and without mercy. She contributed to Allied victory in ways that are difficult to quantify, but impossible to dismiss. And then she went home to Cornwall and lived quietly for 54 years, keeping her secrets, feeding stray cats, arranging books on shelves. History forgot her name. Most people still don't know her story. There are no statues of her, no museums dedicated to her memory, no holidays commemorating her achievements, just a few dusty files in British archives. A handful of declassified reports, some fragmentary memories from people who knew her slightly and understood her not at all. And somewhere in France, if you know where to look, there's a section of railway track where the Germans once planted a piece of magnetized steel beneath the rails, not as a weapon, but as a countermeasure, trying to detect the magnetic triggers they believed resistance fighters were using. They never found any, because the trigger wasn't in the tracks. It was in the mind of a woman who understood that the deadliest weapon isn't the bomb itself. It's the hand that delivers it with a smile. Sometimes the greatest weapon isn't a machine. It's a mind that refuses to accept conventional limits. Sometimes victory belongs not to the strongest or the best armed, but to the ones who understand that every rule has a loophole, every system has a vulnerability, and every human being, no matter how well trained, how disciplined, how loyal, has a breaking point. Odette Wieland found that breaking point. She exploited it brilliantly. She changed the war in ways that ripple forward through history, invisible but indelible. And then she disappeared, taking her secrets with her, leaving behind only the echo of her innovation, the understanding that in the right hands, with the right approach, even kindness can become a weapon. Remember her name. Remember that courage isn't always loud, that heroism isn't always obvious, and that the battles that change history are often fought in silence by people we'll never fully understand. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is something no one will ever know you did. Sometimes the most devastating attack is the one that looks like a gift.